Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here for our first Sustaining Belonging workshop of the 2025-2026 academic year, hosted by the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. My name is Alan Linton, and I am the Senior Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, the ACM. We are really happy for you to return to the series and to come to for the first time. It is a space where we try to blend some research, some practice, uh, and provide some concrete tips and strategies for supporting different student populations on small liberal arts campuses like our own. You can find a ton of information on our website at acm.edu under professional development opportunities, where you can learn about previous workshops and some coming up in the future. We look forward to having about 5 or 6 of these throughout the year. And so we really thank you all for being here and for suggesting ideas, including this one. Certainly over the summer and over the last couple of years, our focus has been on international students. But for many people and professionals on our campuses, it's always been the focus. And recent news and stories out here doesn't change that. As of the data that we have collected from last academic year, roughly 12% of our ACM campuses combined are international students. That's around 2,600 people. That matters. And we are really excited to have two professionals from our campuses to share some best tips and strategies and lead a conversation around international student belonging. I'm pleased to turn it over to Karen and Luyen to lead us in our session today. Thanks.
Great. You are welcome to go ahead and put the slides, the first slide on there, Alan. Thanks so much for inviting both of us to be here today. I'm happy to see so many DSOs in the room. I hope there's also an audience outside of that, because our focus today is to talk about that role a little bit more in depth for other folks to learn about it. As you can see from the chat, we've invited you to offer your name, institution, and title there so that we can learn more about who's in the room. You'll notice are we welcome here is the tagline here. I'll proceed to the next slide, if you will, and list sort of our objectives for this session. That first slide, of course, was a play on the question, "Are you welcome here?" But the "You Are Welcome Here" USA.org campaign was initiated by Temple University in 2016 to affirm globally that U.S. institutions are, quote, "friendly, safe, and committed to international student enrollment and success." And so one of the prime session objectives is to invite all of our listeners to participate in that intention in your work. The second is to increase awareness of and trust in your international student offices, your international student scholar services, what we in the field would label as our PDSO or our RO teams. We'll talk a little bit about that terminology. We want to talk a little bit, maybe a reset around what it takes and who it takes to support international students well in 2025, 2026. The work has changed significantly over the last 20 plus years. Luyen and I have been watching that firsthand, as have many in the room. Our fourth is to spotlight briefly some of the current challenges. And of course, that work, our work has been in the news, as Ellen mentioned, these days. And then, of course, to open to Q&A. Next slide. We'll let Luyen do a little on terminology.
So for some of you, you're already aware of some of this, but we just want to kind of establish some basic understanding of sort of who an international student is. So briefly, there's a program called SEVIS, and it was basically came out of 9/11, where we are further tracking international students in the U.S. And as Karen mentioned, we all have various roles, and we have to be vetted by the U.S. government. And so we are either primary, which is one person, or we are designated school officials. That's the DSO part. And for the most part, the SEVIS system is looking at students on a particular type of visa category for F1, and they're coming here not with the intention of staying in the US forever, though that may be something else. But so we have to basically, the incomings and going ons of their international student record and details are reported into SEVIS pretty much every day where we're in the system for whatever reasons. There are other students in the US, perhaps at our institutions, who are international, but also not in F1 visa. Some of them may also be what some of the exchange students may come as a F visa or a J visa through various partners that you all may or your schools may participate in. Some of them are listed here. But we also work with a lot of students who are non-immigrant, but are here in the US under other visa categories. Some are listed there. Their parents or family member works for the government. They're here with a company or not. They're here perhaps as religious workers or something like that. So that's one side of our house, and then the other side of the house is some of our colleagues here are what's called AROs or alternative or responsible officers, and they have to report people who are on J visas in those categories, also in another version of the SEVIS system as well. Now, there's also other students that your campus may call international, but we do not report them in SEVIS, but they may face issues that we'll talk a little bit about today of financial aid, work authorization, tax implications, travel limitations, and those can be students on various other categories within the US government, undocumented type students, what's called TPS, temporary protected status, that is pretty much going away. And then those are designated by the US government as it's immigrants or other refugees. And with immigrants, they can be what's called permanent resident holders or green card holders. And then for some of us that in your schools may also called American citizens or permanent residents who live outside of the U.S. As part of your international community, but for visa purpose, they're not because they're U.S. residents or citizens. And those are where sort of the old school understanding of third culture kids or U.S. global nomads. But now some of our students are pretty much our third culture kids too because they've studied at other schools. So that's just a quick rundown of some of the terminology that we deal with. Next slide, please.
We want to talk a little bit about encouraging folks to know the work of your PDSO, your International Student Advisor, and we have a couple slides to lift up their work. I think international offices on various campuses within the ACM and the GLCA report, some under student affairs, some under global initiatives, some under DEI, diversity inclusion, and some to the admission office or the registrar's office. Regardless of where they report, most are focused on two priority areas, and both are essential to enhance belonging, of course. So one priority, you can see in the image, I have some acronyms specific to Grinnell. The blue is sort of the immigration compliance side, and the green is sort of the cultural transitions and belonging side. And that cultural transitions, we're talking about things like onboarding and social cultural adjustment, programming, belonging. This is incredibly valuable work. And I think Luyen and I would both echo that when we started in this profession, that was a majority of the work of an international student office. But the second area, this immigration and compliance and other regulatory issues have really increased exponentially over our career. And it is, I will say, it has become a priority. And so that's part of the shout out of this slide, is to take you a little bit deeper into some of what the DSOs are doing. We can go to the next slide, and I will drill in a little bit on compliance to lift up. You can see in the pie chart, it offers sort of an estimate of international student affairs offices. The slice attributed to immigration has definitely grown. And I'll name that immigration compliance really has two different aspects to it. I'd say it's more known, the work that we do around student-facing work. We, teach and advise students about their status and their benefits. We help facilitate applications and reporting requirements. We help them navigate issues beyond immigration, like Social Security numbers, real IDs, taxes, legal referrals, et cetera. But increasingly, we're also focused on institution-facing work, which is perhaps lesser known. Where we do CVIS reporting, which is an institutional compliance requirement, not just a requirement for the students, right? And our compliance determines the school's continued capacity and eligibility to enroll students and host exchange visitors. We maintain the school's I-17 petition, which is a way that we are monitoring and reporting to the government about changes in the college's academic program and curriculum. And we do go through a biannual recertification process to retain the I-17 petition. One of the most recent executive orders increases data reporting on the I-17. We also, as responsible officers, are submitting annual reports on hosting exchange visitors, incident reports on issues that might impact their stay, and the redesignation application requirements. I think finally, we're really invested in discussions and training opportunities around how best institution-wide we can support international students and scholars, as well as policy implications and data collection. Most of us are submitting, for example, the IIE Open Doors data. The next slide gives a snapshot of the full F1 life cycle. And I think it's a really, we're an unusual office in this regard because we are really do have legal requirements for the breadth of a student's engagement from their pre-arrival up to half a year before they arrive, throughout their 4 years of on-campus enrollment, and after graduation, both for the full year of OPT if they pursue that, and for the 2 additional years of STEM OPT. You can see some specific examples within each stage of the types of responsibilities that DSOs are responsible for, both for supporting the alum as they navigate these issues and the institutional compliance of reporting to the federal government about things like where they're living, who they're working for, what their job responsibilities are, even through the STEM period, what their learning objectives on site at the position they hold in the U.S. Yep, I'll pass on to Luyen for institutional considerations.
So, there's we just put a link in. Well, there should be a link, but to Teradata, there's a report that was prepared by them in terms of what our roles are doing and staffing and all this stuff. But you can access that perhaps later on. But in 2025, I guess the question is where do we and I think Karen and I have and other colleagues here have been in various offices. Sometimes we get moved from one division to another, but our role remains the same. We just have perhaps different people to report to and all this stuff. But I guess with each, whether you're in student affairs, academic affairs, diversity, inclusion, campus services, or student activities, depending on who wants to kind of know. But it's important to kind of know that I think increasingly, Karen and I would agree with each other, and we hope that you will see that the roles that DSO play is, I don't believe that we're getting the recognition and certainly compensation as compliance officers, because that's truly what we are. And we have both served in offices where we're just one person dealing with perhaps with even 50 or 100 of students. And we know that some of our colleagues here today and not here today, they're still just one person dealing with a lot of students. Personally, I feel that's unfair, because when you talk about student-teacher ratio, there's professor with 1 to 12 students or 1 to 20 or whatever, or coaches and they have a small team. But in some cases, many of our colleagues are just working with one person, them, and handling, whether it's dozens of students or hundreds of students, and in some cases maybe thousands of students, depending on what type of small liberal arts college it is or not. But so that's something that I think that people should be aware of as well. We also know that some of our colleagues have shared over the years that they sometimes have a hard time securing uh, financial support for even things like professional membership or training. And so we are advocating and hoping that's something that your schools will look at and see whether or not, are your DSOs being supported if possible. Simple things perhaps like membership to our professional organization called NAFSA, and annual subscriptions to various journals and other things that we should have access to, because we know some of our colleagues do not even have simple access to that. Also one thing, if you're not aware of, thanks to Karen many, many years ago, perhaps 2 decades now, I can't remember, she started something that we now call the ACM GLCA with the greater uh, college, sorry, ACM GLCA roundtable. And we do that roughly every couple years. The next one is being held in Minnesota, kindly hosted by St. Olaf and Carleton in Northfield, Minnesota. So those are just some basic things that we think that they should have some access to. A lot of times faculty and staff will call us or one of you, perhaps say, let's call an immigration attorney. Great idea, but there's some caution regarding that, because they have certain expertise the way that we all have certain expertise, but we have found that many immigration attorneys, they're also limited, and many of them do not understand the regulations or the system, the CBIS system, and what it means to be an F or J student. And so at times, like what does a faculty or staff mean by let's call an immigration attorney? What would that do really? Again, we are not trained immigration attorney. Some of us might be, but generally most of us are not. But we are grounded in trying to understand regulations as it affect our students and scholars, and where that sort of comes up into regulations and policies within our school and how do those things work. So if you can, and if our colleagues can, who are DSOs or ROs, have an opportunity to meet with them, we certainly encourage that as well. What do other faculty, staff, and administration need to support a global student body with intention? I think it's just kind of the big question that you'll see in a later slide is just like, why is it different for an international student? And so that's something that I'd certainly encourage people to take a look at when I've had an opportunity to present in forums like this. And sometimes it is, just bluntly money and another person to be there, but there should be backup. And then I think also just contacting the office at your respective school, and whether or not people who are asking questions understand the roles that we do in all of this as well. Next slide. Unless Karen, did I miss anything as well?
No, I did put in the chat the link to that Teradata study if folks are interested in that.
Thank you. I think, okay, so employee inclusive design, some of this does require, as I mentioned, some financial resource, but others is just asking questions. And as I mentioned, why or how might things be different for international students comes up a lot, and people don't realize that. So, for example, we understand that you all, as you connect with students and whatever your role on campus, may not or need to know that a student has a certain visa status. But if they disclose to you or they share, you should also, I guess, if you are a faculty member here today, think about how you introduce yourself to your students and how you might learn about them in a safe environment about what their immigration or visa status is. And certainly, you can certainly approach our college, but we also don't want to kind of, I don't know, perhaps out students in some ways. But one thing is that we can, as we all can hopefully agree to, we can't assume by someone's accent, address, name, or appearance that they're international or not. And I see that almost every day with the data systems that we work with at Macalester, and the way that we try to sort of use certain labels. It does not mean the student is on a visa or not, or international in the sense that it could be a U.S. resident citizen who just happens to live outside of the U.S. But there are 3 areas we want to share with you to think about: is visa status, culture, and distance. And under visa status, we want to, and again, our colleagues who do this on a daily basis know that for international students, it's very important that they choose a major that will allow them some opportunities for employment in the future. But that means that it also affects their career planning. So if you are in the career office here today, think about how are you perhaps cooperating with your college's international student program or scholars program in helping to understand what things students face, international students, in their career planning. If you aren't already aware, international students just can't get a job at the local McDonald's or Starbucks. And if they do an internship, everything has to relate to their intended or declared major. And for graduates, it has to be their major. So you can't just work at McDonald's if you are a music major, for example. And so that's really important to kind of understand. Also, academic policies and implications. Even today, post-COVID, sometimes I hear faculty members say, "Oh, students, go ahead and just take time off." Well, international students can't take time off and remain in the U.S. because of various immigration regulations. And so those are just two very basic things that I think we face on a daily basis, perhaps or weekly, looking at visa status and what students study and how they can remain a student in the U.S. I mean, even just basic things like requirements that they need, number of credits that they need, and they can't just take time off like their domestic classmates because they're experiencing whatever. It has to be documented. It has to be approved before just, you know, dropping out of a class or not taking a class. In the terms of culture, we encourage people to look at the different educational systems that students are coming from. Some students certainly might go to what we call international schools, but many may not. For example, if your colleges are like some of ours, you may have seen an expansion of students from mainland China. Well, mainland China's Chinese students, they go to school perhaps in one language and then, or perhaps two languages, but they don't socialize the way that some of those peers who might have gone to so-called international schools or United World Colleges, for those of you who have students from those schools. And so that's very different as well. Or someone didn't go to US high school or such like that. Other cultural things, simply just looking and talking to your, for example, food service, are they are they able to help students to kind of prepare as much as possible, not as the same food that the student may have from home, but the cultural dietary needs and preferences of students, the same way that we may sort of make sure that for our Jewish students, certainly for the high holidays and beyond, those are our Muslim students. So for our students, can that be considered as well? The other part of culture is something that's frustrating for all of us, particularly for international students, is how is healthcare and insurance in the U.S. versus elsewhere, which pretty much it is different. And so, is there someone on your campus, if possible? If not, does it fall to one of our colleagues, a designated school official, to somehow explain healthcare and insurance on top of immigration regulations and everything else that we are trying to help students with? So that's something to consider as well. And even health insurance, is it a requirement and are students covered for various things? The third thing that come into play for inclusive design, we think, is distance. We know that some of our colleagues are still struggling at your respective schools just to make sure that students have some place to go during break. And and so that's something that should be resolved today, meaning this period, not necessarily today, but, and so and that's a big issue, particularly now as students are coming into, are they on a list of banned or travel questionable countries, and we know that the financial costs can be a burden too, like who's going to pay for it? And then, with students asking about, can I get money to travel to back home or whatever, is that even advisable? And those kind of things that come up. I think also with distance comes about just like how are they handling this, who is supporting them, whether they are one of your student workers in one of your classes or just in something that you are involved in on campus. Where can a student go for help? And besides just the International Students Office. So those are three things that we would like to share for consideration, and there's certainly a lot more that we can address here today. Next slide, please.
Well, let's stay there a second. I feel like I really want to underscore this concept of inclusive design and name that I think it's been our tendency as professionals, as institutions, to look at the unique needs of a global student body and focus attention directly on students who have those needs. And I think when Luyen and I have been thinking about inclusive design, part of what we've really evolved in our thinking that that really this is an institutional question. So it's very common for there to be a perception that if there's a unique challenge for an international student, that sending them to the international student office is the way to go. But when we're talking about inclusive design, we're actually asking all of you, regardless of your position, and really virtually every functional area of the college needs to think about the unique needs of enrolling a global student body. And I feel like with the concept of inclusive design, if we think about that, that we're more likely to actually help all students, right? To recognize the unique needs. So it is naming visa status, culture, and distance, but I think we're really calling on every functional area of the college, not just an international student office, to be thinking about what that means. It might mean that campus-wide communication about voting, for example. It's important not to assume that everyone who's reading that message can vote in the United States. So if we're sending out a message about the value of voting, we have to embed language that says to every one of our students, vote. Here's what voting looks like in the United States, or here's what it looks like for many of our students. But to recognize that it isn't everybody who's reading that message is not going to see it the same way. So I think there's lots of examples of ways when we talk about these specific examples, whether it's the way we communicate about health insurance or about move in, move out dates, or about choosing a major in career planning, that if we're thinking inclusively, that our message on all of these things thinks about the impact on the reader, on the learner, on the student on the other end. So.
Karen, if I can add to, I really appreciate you reminding me of our sort of outside conversation before today. The one thing that has come up in the last week or two for us here on campus is the way that professors design classes. So, for example, we've all heard that students are being more, vetted socially media. Well, as some of you may know, it is not anything new. It's been in existence since 2019 when the current administration was last in power. I'll just say that. And so that's been there, but we are aware that with some of our professors, as you all may design classes that talks about, protesting,
Controversial topics.
yeah, controversial topics, or just going out and posting or not posting. That's something that should also be considered as part of inclusive design. If you have some students to be sort of socially active in some ways, how will that affect our international students if the government in power is also then looking and monitoring social media and other things? And it's not just social media, but anything that might be posted on the internet. And so that's something to consider as well. Can there be a way for an international student or any student to opt out of those requirements to be somehow active to get your credit or requirement or grade without putting themselves in danger as well? So
that's a perfect transition to the next slide. We've both Luyen and I, and actually a number of folks in the room, have been in the field supporting international students and scholars for many, many years. And it's not new for international students and scholars and for advisors to feel the impact of political activity. So, we could talk for hours about the aftermath of 9/11 or the impact of different US presidential administrations in this moment. International students are already the most closely tracked visitors to the US. SEVIS was specifically designed for that purpose, but new initiatives and hurdles are in the mix, right? So this slide is an attempt to name just a few of the many current issues that are drawing our attention. And there's not time, I promise I'm not going to talk through them specifically, but you're welcome to kind of just take an overview. If you want to bring any of them to the Q&A time, that would be, you'd be invited to do that. I think it's worth naming that current issues span what I would label, well, I've labeled here as public rhetoric, which is, threatening interviews or shots on social media or on news cycles that directly threaten international students or visa holders in general, executive orders that change policy, and agency action that results from executive orders. And then I would name discretion as really important. I have it underlined on my screen because the discretion at the consulates, the discretion at the border, and the discretion in adjudication is the inherent power of officers to practice discretion. I guess that's the best way to say it. I've highlighted a couple in bold here that have been particularly salient for us, but I might drill down right to the proposed rule to return fixed entry and end duration of status benefits. That's maybe on this list, at least from my perspective, one of the most significant changes in the works. It introduces new processes, new fees. It reduces mobility of students. It reduces their capacity to change their program or to move through the natural academic progression of undergraduate to practical training to graduate school without additional hurdles. It shortens grace periods. It really undermines what I think duration of status was designed for, which is to honor the academic trajectory that's quite natural for students who are moving through our system. So that to me would be highlighted as one of the most difficult for us to know how to wrap our heads around how that will look in our advising and in our practical practice. I'd say in this moment, lean heavily on professional associations and memberships. They're essential both to institutional compliance and to helping us understand what's happening out in our work, and then also to add to public discourse and advocacy. I'll shout out NAFSA, which is so important to us. And Luyen mentioned earlier how important it is for DSO and RO staff to have easy access to not just NAFSA membership, but also to the NAFSA advising manual and the important webinars and discussions that they lead. I'll name the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, which offers, a weekly briefing for members on new things, and that's been, at least I know for me, a really, really important network. And of course, the U.S. for Success Coalition, and there are others, but those are three that we wanted to highlight. Luyen, would you want to do any more on that slide?
No, I think that's, yeah, we
Yep.
can move. Yep. We
Okay.
can move on. Yeah.
The next slide's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe this is our last slide. And basically, as you've heard today, if you don't know who your DSO or PDSO, A/RO is, and what those means, just, please check in with your colleagues who are in our similar roles on your particular campus. And we, think about where do your students, where can you assist with culture and language, understanding, what visa status mean. One thing we want to point out is that there are some of our students get visa issuance, which actually expires shortly after their arrival. So there's a difference between visa status and student status, or visa expiration. Sorry, I'm confusing it further, but and so a lot of times some students just forget that when we remind them at whatever orientation or pre-orientation program that it is okay if their visa expires. It doesn't mean that they lose their status in the US, but that's where, again, a call to one of our colleagues to kind of help explain some of that or remind them. Consider where your role can be in terms of how you assist. We are not asking that you all in your busy lives, perhaps sign up for a host family program in your respective school if they have one, or you don't have the capacity to do so. But what does distance mean? And have you been in that similar role that we can sort of have an open arms, if not an open heart for students, to kind of help them with that as much as possible, wherever in what capacity that one can help as well. You see this picture here? That was just actually yesterday. We, as members of the International Student Advising Community for the ACM, the GLCA, we meet monthly, and it's a chance for that I certainly I find much more valuable even sometimes than our NAFSA professional organization, just because of the folks that I've gotten to know there. And so and as mentioned earlier, if I know some of my colleagues are again struggling, with their budgets, but I hope that your or their institutions will allow them to come to the next roundtable we're holding in March. And we hold it hopefully every couple years, as long as there's not a pandemic. And as Karen mentioned, with exclusive design, it's not just let's go to the International Student Office for answers. It's what is the role of everyone else on campus in terms of that process. I know that some of us were asked this summer about the possibility of students staying on campus, and then suddenly, again, the international students is asked to come up with all these activities when we're dealing with recent alums and working on their employment observation, new students coming in, orientation planning, and the myriad of other things that we're kind of doing. So, who else on campus can help with something else if we're supporting a global community? Is that most of it, Karen? Did I miss anything? Oops,
I
my
think that's
apologies.
good. I think I would just shout out that I know the intention of this session is to think about belonging. I want to name that I think it's very natural for us to think about cultural transitions as part of belonging and cultural celebrations. But I also want to name that immigration compliance is also really central to belonging. It says to our students, we see you, we know what your needs are. I've been so thrilled at Grinnell with our Career Center onboarding intra-stride resources to help think about not just U.S. trajectories for international students, but global trajectories for their careers. And that I really would name that not just in the realm of culture and language or distance from home, but also a recognition of visa status, that those are all three really central to supporting student belonging. I think that's all of our slides that we've prepared for the day. So I'm happy, I know Luyen is as well, to take questions. I don't really need the slide to be projected to invite questions. If you want to turn that off, Ellen, you're welcome. And folks are welcome to add questions or comments in the